Welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe. I'm an advisor, author, and general explorer of the service and experience space. My guests tend to have just released some interesting research. They run a company that has some interesting tech in the service and experience space. They are part of an organization that is doing some cool stuff, or they run their own business doing interesting things for both their customers and or their employees. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Des Traynor, who is the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Intercom. Hey, Des, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Adrian?
Very well, very well. So thank you for coming on the podcast. But for the benefit of our listeners and those that read some of the highlights that I put together after each podcast is published, I wonder if you could give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on you and the work that you do and Intercom and all that sort of good stuff.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Intercom, where I work entirely on planning what product we should build to bring our customer service platform to life and keep it delivering for our customers and ultimately for their customers. My entire career before that has been mostly in product design, user experience design. And then 11 years ago, we started working on Intercom, and I've basically been doing that ever since. So it certainly dominates the majority of my LinkedIn, if you like.
Excellent. I should also say that a big shout out to, or a big hello to Mr. Adams, who is your colleague across at Intercom, and he was a friend of the podcast he's been on, probably a couple of years ago. So, right. It's an audio recording, but I'm waving to Paul or an audio recording.
I'll relay it to him. I work with Paul literally every single day. I just spent right before I jumped on here, I was spending the last hour with him.
No, nice. So, Des, I wanted to talk to you about two things in this podcast. And the first one is some recent research you conducted, and I wanted to dig into that. And the second thing I wanted to talk to you about, which seems to be kind of like the hot topic of the day, sort of ChatGPT, and how you made a big statement. You believe it changes everything. Now, I think we should leave the best bit to last.
Sure.
And we should start with the research, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So tell me about the research and what you did, why you did it, and sort of what some of the main headlines were.
Sure. So we're obviously at Intercom, we care a lot about customer service, and we want to help our customers deliver just a top tier customer service to their customers. So in doing, to do that, we always have to understand what expectations are in the market. So we survey thousands of customers in the US and in Ireland to see how ultimately do our customers, or just general consumers, if you like, how do they want to talk to businesses when they're getting support? What are their expectations? What do they want? And generally speaking, there's a range of tones and tactics and styles and channels that people use for support conversations. And we wanted to see what actually works and what do the customers actually want. And their biggest findings, just to give you the sort of three top lines. One is that people value personal communication that makes them seem valued or makes them feel valued. Mm-hmm. And usually what that means is they want something that's appropriate for the relationship they have with the business. VIP people want to be treated better. New customers want a support agent that assumes that you're new, etc. They just want contextual sort of understanding. An interesting finding is, a second one is just there is a split between what younger folk want and what say more experienced or tenured citizens of the internet, if you like, i.e. older folk, want. And what you'll see there is just generally the style, the tone, the word, the emoji usage, the style of interaction is generally it forks between young folks want if you like lightweight, fast text, emoji-filled replies, and older folk appreciate the dear valued Adrian. They want slightly more formal, or at least that's what they're used to. And I think the third finding, we've always been playing with this at Intercom. We say our mission is to make internet business personal, and I think people value that. What there's a lot of pushback on is what they call false familiarity or false friendliness. So anything that feels disingenuous or inauthentic, people do not like. And they were sort of the three sort of biggest findings that popped out.
Okay, so I mean, I wanted to ask you about the idea about, because you mentioned this idea about customers want to feel valued. They want these personalized kind of comms. And I was a bit like, what does that mean?
Mhm.
I mean, can you make that kind of concrete for us? I mean, you did today as an example, like dear valued customer, valued kind of des, whatever. I mean, is that it, or is there more to it than that? Because I think the valuing your customer is one of these kind of almost a platitudinal thing,
Yeah,
right?
it's an empty truism. You'll never see a building saying we don't value our customers, right? Like, it's so what do we mean when we say valued? I think ultimately it means like, to be tactical, if you like, it means communicating with the customer in a way that's like, contextually aware. So as an
Right.
example, one of the most horrible feelings that we all have regularly is like, you contact, your utility company or your broadband provider, you explain your entire problem, and they say, hang on a second, I'm going to transfer you to somebody else. And the next person's like, who are you?
Yeah.
Me, it's account number, blah, blah, blah. And you explain your whole problem again. They're like, oh, that sounds like an engineering problem. Let me transfer you to someone else. And like, you're just kind of walking around, like handing out this information for the first time, like every time.
Mm.
I think that that's the opposite of feeling valued. Another version of this would be like, let's say you buy first class tickets for like many thousands of dollars for like, to fly with an airline from like, whatever, like, Edinburgh to New York. And you try to contact them and you're put like 170 lines in queue. And when you get there, they actually don't talk to their customers over the phone. You should have done this all. And like the key missing thing here is context. No one's idiotic. People aren't spending like 6 cents and expecting to be treated like a $25,000 customer. But it's more like, hey, if I give you information, I expect you to remember that. If I show up and I log into your website and I'm staring at a screen with my purchase history and I contact support, I expect you to also be able to look at my purchase history. I don't think it never feels smart when I have to read out information that's on the screen to you when you're looking at a database where all my stuff is there, unless it's a type of sort of validation or authentication. And then lastly, like, if my situation is quite urgent, I expect you to respond urgently. If I'm a very high value customer, I expect you to treat me as such. If there's an emotional issue at stake, like let's say, I don't know, like, oh, like it's a florist who's going to be late with flowers for the wedding or something like that, I expect you to handle those situations with context. And I think when people talk about feeling valued, it's just basically, have you appraised the entirety of what's going on here, who I am and what I'm trying to do? And are you responding fine? And I think in that world, they have no problem, like, if they go to a website and ask a kind of a by-the-by question, like, oh, does this speaker work with Bluetooth? It's okay if they don't get an immediate answer and like, a handwritten note sent out to their doorstep. Like, when it's not a grave, urgent situation or high emotion, or they're like a first-time shopper or whatever, I think people's expectations aren't ridiculous. But it's more like Paul, who you referenced earlier. Paul often says like the future of like the online customer experience will look more like the past than it does the present. And if you think about the experience you'd have calling into a local store, they will remember you. Your local coffee shop remembers who you are, and they probably remember your order. And if you showed up to complain, they'd probably just take your word for it based on your order history. That like, hey, Adrian doesn't normally complain. There's probably something wrong with the milk or whatever. It's more like to me, like, and to what what the research says is that value just comes down to, please appraise the entirety of me and my situation and respond accordingly. And that's really what it means. And the alternative is like, like treating everyone indiscriminately to a lowest line. I think that's what people really don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all sorts of different things around changing your approach depending on who you are and all these different things. But there's some really fundamental kind of things in there, which is, don't waste my time. Like, yeah, I know it's the number one. What it was research from last year or the year before, which said it was the number one frustration that was shared by both customers and agents. The fact that they had to repeat information. Or agents had to ask for customers to repeat information when they've come off one channel and into like a live channel. And it's just a bit like, excuse my language, sort your shit out.
Yes,
that there's like, that shouldn't be heavy lifting, but you're making it heavy lifting for everybody that's involved.
Yeah. And no one wants it. Like, it's one of those, like, there are times when there can be like, how to say, like friction inserted in a process that benefits one person, but not the other. But this is not it. This is like, both people are pissed off. Like the customer rep is annoyed at having to say, sorry, what was your account number again? And the customer is annoyed by having to say it too. Like, no one's winning in that scenario. And I think that like, Now, like these days, like tools like Intercom and it's sort of its competitive set, like we're working on chipping away a lot of those paper cuts that are like kind of have become unfortunately normal in contacting customer support. But
Yeah.
a lot of that does fade away and will fade away. But it's certainly like it's like respect my time is definitely a core piece of it. For sure.
And so the second one you talked about was this idea that you very delicately phrased different types of people kind of across age groups and things have different tone and style preferences when they're being communicated to. I mean, so I think the thing about I find fascinating about that is that it's almost like an informal versus informal, formal sort of like communication spectrum. It feels like, and I sort of kind of wonder because there's again that's kind of fraught with some difficulties because sometimes kind of just trying to get it right. So I mean, what's the best way for a company or brand to gauge how they should be communicating with their customers? I mean, should they just ask them?
I think it comes down to how like diverse the spectrum of customers you're supporting is. As a general rule of thumb, you should assume any individual prefers to do customer support conversations roughly the same way they prefer to do most of their conversations. So if you talk to like let's say a 16-year-old with a phone who's busy, spends a lot of time on like a combination of like TikTok and Discord and like Instagram or whatever, their preference for how they communicate with their friends is probably going to be messaging emoji, maybe GIFs, that type of thing. And similarly, if you take someone like myself, I don't communicate with a lot of emoji, but I do communicate with a lot of like online text because that's the era I was in.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, let's say like maybe like my parents' generation are still on email, and my grandparents' generation are still on the written letter.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, I think if you follow how people generally communicate, their preference matches whatever they normally do in life.
Right.
So I'll send you a sternly worded letter is not something you hear from a 16-year-old. Same as like, like an acronym like IK. Oh, I can't remember. I know what you mean. Like one of the sort of habits of like the younger generation is they just write things like ILY for I love you. Like it's just pure acronym speak. So it can be, it can be really hard to parse one of these texts. In general, that's what they want their life to be or to be like. So when they talk to customer support, if we reply, like if the support rep replies to, let's just say somebody who's used to formality, who's used to like long form email or written letters, and they get a reply of a GIF or an emoji and nothing else, they will be justifiably, what the hell is this? And similarly, the
somebody sends it back with like 2 thumbs up, going,
yeah, totally. Or some dude putting on shades with like dealt with. I was like, sorry, what? And the other extreme is just as funny to watch, which is if you hit like a 16-year-old who's used to communicating an acronym and GIFs, hit them like 5 paragraphs of text, you'll get a reply that says something like, I ain't reading all that, but I'm happy for you, whatever it was. That is like, so like, I guess to go back to your actual question, support people based on how they like talk to people based on how they talk to you is the best way to describe it. And that means if your company receives a written letter, you're probably better off responding in kind. And if your company receives or you online type support query, you're probably best off replying with why. That's how it goes. And I just think like again that comes back to this idea of make me feel valued, recognize who I am, recognize clearly what is my preference for how I talk, etc.
Yeah. And what about the surveys? Did it show up any changing or shifting preferences around sort of like channels, particularly around chatbots, the phone, email, messaging, all these different things? Because it changes across, I guess, different kind of geographies. But like, what did the research kind of uncover on that respect?
I think what we're seeing is like basically people need to go omnichannel. There's like, and the reason they need to go omnichannel is entirely because their customers want omnichannel. So like, and by omnichannel, what I mean is, in Europe, it's WhatsApp. In America, it could be anything from like WhatsApp in pockets to like Apple Business Chat to like, who knows in the future, Telegram, Signal, Discord, etc. Mm-hmm. But, and then like obviously Twitter and Instagram and TikTok will all be there as well. I think, part of the strategy that says we'll talk to our customers any way they want to talk to us includes the medium that they choose to talk to you through. Mm-hmm. And like what that ultimately means is like the death of the contact us form, right? This idea of like you go to like acme.com/contact, and you fill in 27 drop downs and hit submit.
Mm-hmm.
That's gone. These days, people want to go to either WhatsApp or some messenger, and they'll probably we're not too far away. It might only be like a matter of like months or years from them just like searching WhatsApp for your company contact details and writing a message and hitting send. And that will start a WhatsApp conversation between you and whatever it is, like your florist or your baker or your butcher or whatever. And then on the back end, that business may still have like intercom or some sort of like actual support platform where they're dealing with all of these inbound queries. But the key point is the replies still go out like WhatsApp messages. And I think that's like, for us, like one of our core beliefs is like, we have like 3 big beliefs about the sort of future of customer service, but one of them is messaging and omnichannel is the future because it's what the next generation wants.
Mm-hmm. I think I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it goes back to that sort of whole thing around having things connected and not having to repeat information and all these different things, but also being to be able to contextually straddle those channels as well.
Yeah.
So like you could be actually old school on the phone with something because you're dealing with a complicated sort of issue and stuff, and somebody says to you like, right, fine, I'm going to look into that for you. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I tell you what, I see you calling on a mobile. I'm going to text you or I'm going to WhatsApp you a link, which is giving you going to like real time updates sort of thing, so you can keep on. So you don't actually have to call back in to get the whole thing. That's where people are at right now, right?
That's the best use case. Like if you think of like that's what we call like multimodal support. Like so, you might start off as a conversation. It might be getting complicated or it might be getting heated, and you say, "Hey, can we just jump on a quick call?" You hear them out. You say, "Okay, cool. Let me message you a URL or a file attachment or whatever it is, and you'll receive that real time. And I'll tell you what, leave it with me, and I'll ping you again once we have a resolution." And that world, like both people can put away their phone and be like, "Okay, we're like." The ball's in his court or her court, and I'll be alerted next. And like that's just a much better outcome than waiting online or waiting on hold or any of those sort of things. So like I just think you need the sort of plethora of options, whether it's, as I said, like whether it's video calls, audio calls, messaging, whether it's like email. You need all of those options there for like to cater for the needs of a diverse customer base. Which for most of like whether like if you're a Shopify store or if you're like a B2B or B2C software product, the chances are your age range will span folks who prefer like short texts and folks who want long form emails. So you need to adapt and be able to cater to all.
Yeah, perfect. So before we get anything else we missed out before we dig into this kind of whole ChatGPT sort of thing. Well, actually, let's call it generative AI kind of like stuff.
I think one interesting bridge is like we looked in the research. We talked about the role of chatbots, which obviously we'll get into in a second with the rise of ChatGPT, etc. We've basically people have I think there's a lot of perceived ill will towards automation. Generally speaking, people are very, very happy for a chatbot to jump in with a right answer, and if the answer is wrong, they just dismiss it. And as long as it doesn't get in their way or annoy them, there's actually no issue with the idea of like automated attempts to ultimately offer like a 0-second resolution. People are happy with that as long as it can either be right or easily dismissible when wrong. And I think a lot of people they worry like that. Well, what if our customers want a handwritten artisanal resolution by a real person? And I think that's like it's not a real fear. Like customers just want their answer, and to get their answer, they actually don't care if it came from a machine or from a human, from the actual individual fingers of a support rep. It doesn't actually matter. They're just like, help me get my answer. And that's something that is intuitively true, but it was just interesting for it to come back as strongly as it did.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also kind of the bottom line is like people are like going, well, ultimately how I'm treated. If I'm treated with respect and I feel like valued and stuff, a large part of that is help me get an answer to the question as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And if you can do that in a polite and respectful sort of way that is aligned with kind of like my communication preferences, then jobs are good.
Totally.
Right?
Exactly.
Awesome.
And like that's a positive brand building interaction with the business. It didn't need a human to be involved to like explain, here's what our opening hours are.
Yeah. So let's get into this ChatGPT thing, which has now been sort of the world has expanded, and now we've got Bard and Ernie and all sorts of other sort of like big, large language model driven chatbots on the stage. We thought, oh, that's unique, and then all of a sudden, everybody else crowded into this space. So, but you said that you believe it changes everything. And I was like, that's a really big statement. Can you explain to me what you mean by that?
Yeah. All software is ultimately like a interface of inputs and outputs. And quote unquote, like good at something, let's say it's movie editing or podcast editing or audio or like creating or painting. The requirement has up until now always been like, do you know how to use the interface well? So to give you an example, I could take a photo of somebody and I could load that into Photoshop, and I could Photoshop it, as the phrase goes. I could change the background to be black and white. I could spruce up the color. The thing that stops most people from doing all those things is not that they don't want it, it's that they don't know how to do it. And the thing that stands in their way is the interface. And we have always had this big, like since early 2000s, we've had this like web movement around usability and making it easy to do things. And that has always come at a cost. Making something very easy to do often makes it less efficient for power users. A power user being somebody who knows exactly how to do it and they know all the fancy keyboard shortcuts or whatever. So software has always kind of wrestled with this idea of like surfacing what's possible on all that power, but also making it simple to use. Now, when I saw the first versions of ChatGPT, initially we all did the same thing, some random searches like, hey, can you tell me what age is Tom Cruise, or what's the best movie? Or then you started trying some creativity type things like, hey, write me lyrics to a song that talks about like a podcast about customer experience or something like that. And you actually have a pretty good stab at these things. And you're pretty impressed initially because, you know, in general, where ChatGPT really blows you away is in areas where you're like, kind of like, you know, people say when you see a dog walking on its hind legs, it's not that it's walking well, it's the fact that it's able to do it at all is what's impressing you, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of early like screenshots that people were going viral with on ChatGPT were exactly that. It was just like, oh my God, can you believe it was able to even have a go at this? Sure. And so like, if you bring that, so what's happening? Well, I think what's happening is, if you can explain what it is you are trying to do, or what it is you are trying to create, or what outcome it is you're hoping to achieve in pretty basic English, the software will now do easily like 80% of the work of taking your intention and making it so. So to give you a very example, you can now type in things like saying, make this photo black and white, except for keep the rows red and put everything else in blur. And again, that could have been like 2 hours of somebody who's really good at Photoshop, or it can be now it's, can you type that sentence and press return? So the nature of input output has changed a lot. If you can express what it is you're trying to do, you can now get very close towards doing it. The nature of creativity has changed as well. If you say, hey, I'd like a really strong bass line that like is in the background, but it has a important hook and a keyboard kicks in halfway through, that can actually now turn into music. And that's the sort of type of the change of creativity that we've seen. So we've talked about, say, like turning, you know, understanding intent and ultimately taking the user interface out of the way. And we've talked about like the changing in creativity. The last piece I'd say is taking what I would call the undifferentiated heavy lifting of using a computer. So as an example, oftentimes you start typing something and you know exactly where it is you're going to go. You know that basically, you know, if you use Gmail, you would have experienced this phenomena where it's guessing what you want to say and you just hit tab to have it auto-complete on it. Or if you use Google Docs, that type of thing is happening now. When we first saw that, it was happening at word level. It was like if you start typing the beginning of a word, it'll guess the end of the word. Now it's happening at, then it moved to sentence level. Now we're seeing it happen at like paragraph level, right? So, and again, the key idea here is undifferentiated. So like the first sentence of an email or the first like paragraph of a complaint, maybe it's always the same. Dear Sir, Madam, I visited your store on the 25th of blah, 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 and I was very disgusted by blah, blah. So I think in the field of design, we often talk about what's called tool time and task time. Task time is when you're actually doing the work. So if I said to you like, hey, Adrian, I would love you to think about what are some good questions to ask the CEO of Virgin Airlines, you'd probably think in your head. That's what we call task time.
Right.
Tool time, the bit where you go and write all that down and bold some bits and italic some bits and extract some pull quotes. Like you're just basically using the tool to communicate what's already clearly in your head. I think we're going to see the cost of tool time reduced to zero because GPT and technologies like GPT will change it. So then why does this change everything? Well, I think we've changed creativity, we've changed input, output, and we've also changed like all of the undifferentiated heavy lifting involving in any sort of regular task that people do. That ultimately changes industries. All industries will be different because of that. Obviously, my world is customer service, and that's the one I observe most. But I can't see if you're in journalism right now, of course the role of journalism has changed. If you are in like, sports analysis, of course that's changed. If you're like working on a spreadsheet product, I guarantee you, for every person who's learned off Excel macros, they're going to say something like, well, it'll never be able to do blah. And somebody else is going to show you a demo where you say, find me the average best 3 running months where profit was above 20%. And the GPT, the technology is just going to work out, here's the formula you need, and here's your answer. And again, it's this idea of turning intention into output is just, it's so transformative to how like the next 12, 24 months are going to play out across all sort of industries that are like heavily computerized.
Right. And you mentioned, I mean, you're in the service and experience space, and this is what this podcast is about. I mean, so how do you think as this technology will change customer service and support? Because the thing that I was, because I'm not a technologist, I'm kind of like, I know enough about it, I guess, to kind of know my way around. And I know in the background of the ChatGPT, I feel like it's trained on, what's it, 175 billion parameters, which I guess is like words and combinations of words around the internet. And it's basically, what did they do? They scraped pretty much the whole internet up until the end of it, like 2021, and that's their kind of their baseline, as it were.
That's right.
But I guess my question is, how do you think this technology will change customer service or sort of support specifically? Because there's stuff that which is not your domain knowledge and stuff that is your domain knowledge. And I guess we need to separate. Do we need to separate out the ChatGPT interfaces, as it were, and actually the underlying kind of technology and what you can point it at? Is that right?
Yes, ultimately, yes. Like the ChatGPT, if we just talk about that specifically, ChatGPT sits on this like bedrock of advancements called large language models. It's just awesome. With ChatGPT, yes, it's really, really good at basically producing stuff that has like already been known on the internet, or sounds like would already have been known on the internet as of like October 2021 or whatever the cutoff date was. So why is that alone useful? Well, it means it's like world class at, like, say, sentence completion. It all can also like it knows a lot of things that are true. Like it knows how to reset an iPhone and things like that, right? So it has a certain amount of like stock knowledge, and also is perfect at actually explaining things at literally token completion. But what that sounds like is writing good sentences and writing lots of sentences and writing lots of paragraphs, etc. So the obvious sort of application of those two technologies alone, before we get into anything else, is just if it's a lot easier to one, like all internet facts are commodities. So it's in ChatGPT knows, as I said, how to reset an iPhone, how to like download, how to bookmark something in Chrome. It just knows all these sort of stock things.
Right.
And then separately, it can actually write a lot of text, and it performs at a very high quality. What can that like sort of that shape of intelligence be good for? Well, turns out a lot of customer support involves using facts that are like of the internet, so they're not totally. So if you buy a television and there's a red light that's blinking, the chances are it's known what that means already. So it will be able to autocomplete answers along those sort of idea that are probably plausibly correct, if not totally correct. It can also turn, like, with some of the features we released, like it can turn bullet points such as like, nope, I'm sorry, your order isn't shipped yet. It'll hopefully be there Tuesday. It can turn that into like a well-written answer that sounds quite respectful, which basically you massively reduce the amount of like, back to the idea of tool time and task time. you reduce the tool time substantially to being like, just give me the very short summary and I will worry about making it into like a nice, legible, friendly answer. So that's the technology that we launched a couple of weeks ago. It's that type of thing. So I think if you think about customer support as sometimes you're applying very specific judgment specifically to your training in your company, and other times within the same workflow, you are going through the rote work of like, now I need to like type this out and I need to explain why that's the case or why we can't do the order. A lot of that work can be like it'll fall into the grounds of like auto completion, right? It'll be like, you're saying no, and here's why. And so because of that, I think the opportunity for customer service teams is to get really good at the judgment aspect that they're applying, and actually to get more like proactive and get ahead of issues. Because when as like technologies like we've built kind of proliferate, and all support agents become augmented with this sort of powerful composer tool that like lets them sort of, like I said, just lets them like expand upon or like suggest answers to customers. What we'll see then is they have more like more options to invest their time either in higher order queries or either in like turning it like from hate to love, or like any of those areas where they can actually apply human judgment a lot better. Because it turns out like, these people were never typists. Now we've just taken away a lot of the typing.
Right. Yeah, no, so it feels like you're kind of like the role will be, as you say, more focused on that sort of taking away some of the heavy lifting. It's probably more a role of, as you say, judgment or guide or stewardship around kind of like the output, like going, oh, that's about that, that's about that, and then it's sort of like kind of, and it's more of a cognitive load rather than a physical tool time and task time, right?
Exactly. So, and I see this like whenever I sit with support reps, even in our customer support team. Like one thing that another feature we released was like summarize. So like a customer can write in like a 27 paragraph long, here's I think what's going on, blah, blah, blah. You can now just click summarize and get like the 2 sentence version of what the hell just happened. Or if you inherit a conversation from somebody else who's like, hey, I have to go on break, but can you take this on? You can just click summarize and get brought up to speed. And then what you see is the experienced support reps, they go, I see what this is. It's because this credit card expired last week. Okay, got it. And from that point, like the puzzle is solved. I don't know, analogy I use a bit is like, as you get towards the end of a Sudoku, you're like, I've broken the back of it now. I know exactly. Now it's just a game of like literal completion. So once you've broken the back of the customer support puzzle that you've been handled, everything after that is just typing. So if you reduce that just typing down to like 5 keystrokes from 500, that's actually a significant save. It's also like results in a kind of more engaged employee because they don't have to fall into this like slump of, oh, now I just need to write the 3 paragraphs where we explain why we're sorry and that the shipping crisis and there's a supply chain shortage in the Suez Canal and all that shit. So all that just has to get rolled out, and now you don't have to do it. Like that can happen for you.
And so you say you've kind of launched some stuff that is that there are features kind of this. Can you give me a quick highlight of what those sort of things are? There's the summarization thing, which that sounds kind of pretty kind of cool. Like, tell me what's kind of going on. What else is there?
Yeah, so we launched summarization. We launched expansion. So expansion is basically give me 2 or 3 bullet points and hit expand upon, and it'll kind of write it so it's a more respectful sentence. So you can say something like, can't do that, here's a coupon, and it'll be like, hey, dear sir, madam, I'm really sorry, blah, blah, we can't actually action that right now because of blah, and here's a coupon to retrieve, so it'll do all that work for you. There's like, there's 2 tone adjusters. So I've been saying internally a lot, like, you're familiar with the bold, italic, and underline of text editing. Well, now we're going to have tone editing as well. And so the 2 tones we've added is like make more formal and or make more like playful. Going back to the survey results we spoke about in the first half of the podcast, some people want something that's pretty formal and respectful, like if you're a bank or whatever. So you can write the answer, you can expand upon it, and you can say, and make it pretty formal, please, and it'll do that for you as well. Or you can say, make it pretty playful if you're like, if you're like a cool store on Shopify selling like whatever, like makeup or skateboards or something. You can say, make it more playful, and you'll get this sort of more emoji-filled sort of vibe, if you like, into the answer as well.
And I guess this is going to be a growing feature set that you're going to kind of like, as you kind of innovate and then think about different kind of like things. But I was also going to say about the tone sort of thing, because I guess that would be, pretty sure that you're probably going to be able to, if you're a brand and you've got like a tone of voice and brand kind of like values and all these different things, you're going to be able to sort of adjust that so to align it with your kind of brand values as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, right now, like we don't have that, but like that's an obvious extension here. Right now, we like, you know, what we're getting into there is like the field that people might call like prompt engineering. So right now we can say things like make this seem more like playful, as if it was like you sending a message to your best friend and you were like, you know, whatever. But like for sure, if you wanted it to sound like pick a famous brand's tone of voice, let's say it was like Apple, you might say, make it sound creative, visionary, inspiring, like something that's at the intersection of the liberal arts and humanities or something like that, right? You know, and it'll generally pick that up. And like, and what you're doing there is you're engineering the prompt that the AI receives to like kind of act upon. And so it knows exactly what it to do. And yeah, like, so basically standardizing a company's tone of voice will become more possible because of this as well.
Yeah. Perfect. And so I also know that you've got this stuff is not just stuff that you've dreamt up and you've gone and you've kind of released into the wild, because I know that you've got almost like 100 customers that are already using and testing the features that other kind of products. And I just wanted to, do you have any early news about kind of like where they're applying it and where they're seeing the best value and all these different things? But you don't have to mention, obviously, no names required.
Sure, we've about 150 or so in the beta, and then as of today, we've opened it to like maybe 1,000 more. So feedback has been phenomenal, honestly. Both the demand for the beta, which we had to keep it closed while we were still working it out, because like, you know, it was a pretty early tool when we first opened it. Feedback has been like, you know, people have been using words like revolutionary and game changer. You know, like it's basically because it's such a productivity multiplier. People are like, you know, just generally blown away that the idea that they can turn like 3 bullet points into an entire help center article with one click. They're like, oh my God, like, you know, you write 10 articles a day, that's a big boost. Similarly, like people who, you know, we have a say high frequency grocery delivery company. They again, not naming names, but like they do a lot of like you know, similar-ish replies along similar tones. But now like we've reduced down the pain of creating those from like, well, again, like one simple way to think about it might be like what 500, 600 keystrokes in a standard reply, as if that's the number of characters that I might take. That can come down to like can come down to like, you know, 5, 10, you know, like, you know, no thanks, see you Tuesday, expand. And like that type of thing lets you preserve all of the intentionality without dropping into like non-formality, which would matter for a lot of businesses, and still actually like, you know, keep the productivity high. And then lastly, summarization I think is huge. People are using it in loads of different ways. There's both, I've just been handed a new problem and I need to summarize it. There's, I'm handing a problem off to somebody. There is like, from a product perspective, if you're a product manager, you're like, what are the main issues we're seeing with the new reporting feature we built? Well, you can go to the customer support team and go, hey, can you all summarize all the reporting stuff and let me know what's gone wrong? And that used to be someone's job to run around like effectively like with a digital version of a clipboard gathering data. And now it's just a few minutes, they're done. And like that sort of translation of like hours of work to like seconds is like it's just transformative. There's no other way to look at it.
Nice. Wow. That's going to sound super cool. So anyway, I know that we're kind of getting on in time, and I wanted to just say, well, thank you for giving me that bit of a tour about what you're doing and your view and how you're applying it. I mean, is there anything else you'd want to add before I ask you some wrap up questions?
I think the biggest area where people are going to be like having to work all this out is we don't actually believe the future will be automation only. We believe it'll be automation first, or artificial intelligence first. But the overlap and the exchange and handover between humans and bots is something that we will be working hard to perfect, because I don't think we're going to get close to a world where like there is no judgment involved in providing a great support experience. Of course there will be, which means of course there'll be humans. Question is, what is the healthiest way for the interoperability, if you like, between the two, both from a business productivity point of view, but also from an end user's point of view, so it doesn't seem crazy that like you end up in parallel conversations with bots talking across each other and a human trying to like orchestrate it all. So I think like the big area for me is like the future is definitely automation first, but it's definitely not automation only. And then lastly, I think we'll see a lot of very narrow tools trying to do AI for support. But I think unless you actually have an answer to that question of how does this work across an entire support team, how does this work with the like help center, how does this work across everything from like all languages, all reporting requirements, how does it work with the sales team? So that if a VIP customer has a big issue, how do we get them in the loop? Until you can kind of source a way to get all this onto a single platform, the single point tools will, I think, struggle. And one of our beliefs is that, like, obviously AI first, but it has to be AI as part of a comprehensive support solution. It can't just be AI as a little pointy tool floating out there in space, disconnected from everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of the natural curve of sort of just generally technology kind of markets, where people initially kind of go for best in class kind of pinpoint kind of like solutions, but then over time it kind of arcs towards kind of like suites where you bring it all together and it all kind of like works kind of like seamlessly. And so I mean, I think we're in that sort of expand and contract, so the rise of suites, and then something else happens, and then it's like it's all point to point, and then it kind of like then suites come back again, and it's just that sort of undulating curve.
Exactly. Yeah.
So a couple of kind of questions. So I've been asking people over the last kind of like couple of years, given kind of how strange they've been, is that we've gone through a couple of 3 years that have been strange, challenging, bit weird. And the world continues to kind of offer up surprises. What's some of the big things that you've learned that's really informed the way that you're going to approach things going forward?
I think the need to be able to adapt fast to tectonic shifts in technology or in the world is just fundamental from this point onwards. Internally, we talk a lot about resilience. That is to maintain performance through change. And I just think it's going to be essential, as you said, like the past 3 years, like, if you literally just take our little world of customer service, we went from call centers to remote call centers to cloud call centers and all that sort of stuff. Then we went to hybrid, where like half the team are together and half the team aren't, and all that sort of stuff. Then AI launched and kind of dropped another bomb. AI launched publicly in the form of ChatGPT in November, which dropped another type of bomb on our space. And I think in general, to navigate the road ahead, you need to be adaptable and resilient. You need to embrace the changes and ultimately accept what you're seeing change in the world versus fighting against it. I think my fear with companies that fight against it is that they form a little narrative in their head that leaves them perfectly prepared for a world that used to be and not a world that's about to be. And I think, so if you really want to battle through the next few years and probably just forever more in tech, we had a weird period where things were relatively stable for 5 or 6 years, but in general, tech's it's supposed to be a chaos engine. I think adaptability and resilience to sort of take the bumps in the road, and adaptability to see the opportunities and not feel threatened by them, but to actually run towards them in a sense. I think that that's the sort of the traits that I think new orgs need to have, and it's certainly a lot of what I've been trying to inject in Intercom as well.
Excellent. And if you had to boil it all down for into a piece of advice for folks trying to improve their customer or sort of employee experience, and you said we should do more of this or do this one thing, what would it be?
I think I always encourage, in browser language, so everyone has a web browser, there's a thing called a hard refresh, which is when you press shift and F5, or you press shift and the little refresh icon. And what that does, it forces a reload of every single thing, whereas a clean refresh is just, we've already loaded all the libraries and images, let's just rerun the thing and see if any text changed or whatever. And I think in general, too many things have changed in both the technology, the behavior of internet citizens, the world at large, for your support strategy as of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago to still be correct. So the most important thing I think folks need to do, and this isn't just true in customer support, this is true in product development or sales too, but we're just podcast, is to perform a hard refresh and say, given who our customers are and how they behave today, given the technologies that are available, given what our product is, given how our customer support team, customer sales team, customer success team all work, what is the right design? What's the right tooling and technology that we need? Let us carry no baggage from the past. Let us carry no broken installs or rogue tools that somebody once bought in 2015 and we don't know how to get rid of. Let's design a CX experience that is built for a world of automation, that's built for a world of proactive support, not just reactive support, that's built for an omni-channel world, that's built for a conversational or messaging world. And then let's design a customer experience that like embodies the best of all that, knowing that things like automation will get better, knowing that things like customers' expectations of bots will rise, right? All of these things are going to change, and we don't have a say in that. We only have a say in how we respond. So I think that the idea of performing an actual hard refresh end to end is the thing I'd most encourage people to do to really level up. I think everything else is just going to be like, some version of deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, it's like you've made bad choices, or like not even made bad choices. Your choices have expired, and now you need to refresh them. And if you choose not to, you'll be kind of optimizing yesterday's technology.
Awesome. I love that. It's brilliant. So, a couple more things before we go. Quick questions. I've been calling this my longitudinal social research, which is effectively a fancy way of describing kind of like a word association game that I've been doing for Punk CX over the last couple of years. So if I was to ask you, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience? What would you say?
I want to say adaptability. And it's back to the same thing I said earlier. Like, just, can you actually adapt to what's changing around you, or are you just have you somehow calcified into old habits? I think like that, to me, like, when you think about what the era of punk actually meant, it was like kind of like, punk was a reaction to the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think similarly, if you really want to achieve that, you need to like look at what's changing, look at what is, look at what's stayed and tired, and then adapt accordingly. And often that will mean like diverging or like zagging when everyone else is zigs, or whatever like particular phrase you want to put on it. But I just think ability to adapt is the most important thing, because if you don't have that, you won't see the opportunity.
Well, you know what? I am happy to kind of like say, and also a little bit surprised, that I've got a list of over 170 words and phrases, and I don't think adaptability is on there. So shoots, he scores. So, and then the final one is, I've been talking about this idea about experience leadership. And who do you think is, if you like, got it all stitched together? Who's setting the bar? Who's kind of understands that we have to play a bigger, holistic, systemic, integrated kind of game if we're going to kind of win? Who do you think is out there? Who's doing it well?
Yeah, I'm going to give a slightly rogue answer here. I'm going to say Amazon. And the reason I'm going to say that is specifically because of their unique approach to customer service, which is, it's a guy called, I think his name is Bill Price, who wrote a book called The Best Service is No Service. And it's kind of like it summarizes Amazon's approach to delivering customer service, which is ultimately to treat it almost entirely as a bug whenever somebody needs to contact customer service. And I as a type of discussion I have with folks a lot, I say, like, how many dollars do you reckon you've spent on Amazon in your life? And for most people, the answer runs into the thousands, if not tens of thousands. And then I say, how many times have you contacted Amazon customer support? And shockingly, more often than not, I hear 0 or 1. Right? And if there was a 1, what happened? It never showed up. And what happened? Not because of that, I got another. They sent me another one. And then what happened? Well, it turns out 2 of them showed up. The first one was just late or whatever. Right? Now, like, I think the only reason Amazon can get to be that good at that point of scale is because they've invested holistically in what actually the customer service is, which is not like, one way of looking at customer service is like, hey, every time someone contacts us, it should be a great experience. But another way to look at it is, no matter how great that experience was, it probably would have been better if they didn't have to.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Amazon invest across. Like, so they look at it at both levels. Of course, they run a customer support center. Of course, they actually do, attempt to do all the standard, like, surprise and delight type stuff. But I think they're pretty just, genuinely impressive as it relates to removing the common needs. And they do it not by just, like, it sounds like that might just be like, oh, fix all your bugs in your delivery chain or whatever. But they actually do other stuff too. Like, they, you get push notifications if your package is delivered or sorry, if it's late or whatever. But you also get like real time, hey, it's going to show up in the next hour. Will somebody be there? Press here if not. Like, they've really invested in every single way the experience can go wrong. They've worked out ways to make it go right. And I think there's a level of like proaction and proactive thinking that they've invested in that a lot of people miss out on when they're trying to like compete with Amazon, which ultimately results in a lot of people saying it's just easier to buy through Amazon. Like, so the investment in customer service has actually fueled the brand. There are for sure a few hops and skips and leaps to it's not a one-to-one mapping, but like I really think that they've nailed that aspect. And I say it's probably a rogue option because I think people don't think about Amazon as a customer-focused brand in a lot of ways. I think that they think about it more like a website and less like the beautiful Amazon support team. But in some sense, that's the point. They've made that investment.
I think they kind of go back to a very earlier point about omni-channel and stuff, and I think they have a really, really interesting sort of channel strategy where it's and if you want to talk to them, then it's like website or kind of like via the app, possibly via Alexa if you've got Alexa in your kind of home, but that's kind of like a small sort of thing. So it's literally these two things, and it's like going, and guess what? You have to be signed in, so we know exactly kind of who you are and everything else. And so it sort of runs counter to that whole sort of thing. It's like we have to be everywhere to be thing. They've almost kind of like said, we're going to do it here, and we're going to be brilliant, and we're going to use other channels to keep you informed and do all these different sort of things. But you know what you're going to get, and we're going to automate the shit out of it and have all your kind of info and data and history and everything all kind of like there. And ultimately, if you need to escalate, I need to email somebody or call somebody or whatever, but you've got this huge kind of like level of resources that are all kind of there about notifications and all that sort of like stuff. And I think it's a really interesting example because it's like they have completely focused their resources on these areas and gone, we're going to knock that out of the park.
Yeah. I think that's totally correct. I think they probably are a big enough brand that they can do that. I think your average e-commerce store probably needs to be more like, hey, you can WhatsApp us if you want type thing. But yeah, I do agree. Like Amazon have basically said, there's one way to talk to us, and it's the best way to talk to us. And also, while you're in the middle of trying to do that, I guarantee you're going to stumble into the thing you're actually trying to do, which will be like the reorder or request refund or whatever. They have all those workflows automated as well. So and ultimately, again, better experience for the customer if you don't have to wait on hold, if you don't have to explain yourself, etc. You just click the button and you get the outcome.
Yeah, perfect. One last final thing. I know we've run on over a little bit, but it's just been brilliant. As I said, the last kind of 3 years have been a bit strange. I think the world continues to be strange. And I feel like trying to avoid doom scrolling on a kind of like a daily basis, kind of when I'm drinking a coffee in the morning. I'm trying to ask people to kind of share a good news story. So, Des, what's one of the most interesting things that you've seen in the last kind of week that's made you smile?
I think I've been following a lot of the ChatGPT use cases and seeing it do pretty incredible things where previously nothing was available. So this will probably be easier to Google, but I'll tell you just the very quick version. There is a famous, I think, educational psychologist called, I think his name is Benjamin Bloom, who studied like basically what are the best ways to learn and to learn skill in anything. And without doubt, there's a famous study called Bloom's 2 sigma effect, which basically says, if I sit down in the classroom and you sit down for one-to-one coaching with a mentor or like your own designated teacher, if you like, you will perform on average two deviations better than me because you get one-to-one coaching who's correcting your mistakes as you make them, whereas I'm in a classroom with 30 people or whatever. Now, why does that matter in GPT? Well, it turns out hiring a one-to-one educator is really, really hard. They're expensive, and the vast majority of the world cannot even get even close to affording an expert teacher.
Yeah.
Except for one just became available to the entire planet last November, to the entire planet with internet last November. And I think there has been an increasing number of examples where people who wanted to study algebra, calculus, computing, medicine, whatever, and they want somebody to point them in the right direction, to nudge them along. They found this robot called ChatGPT where they can ask questions and then they can say, oh, so you mean blah, blah, blah. And the thing will say, no, you're wrong. Actually, here's one. And then they'll say, okay, well, here's my essay on whatever it is, like the boiling point of alcohol at altitude. And it'll say, right, except for the 4th sentence is incorrect. Here's what you got wrong. And here's why you thought that, but actually here's what's wrong. And I guess what I'm saying is like, we potentially have like opened the door to like exposing mastery level, teaching or education to a lot of the planet when it was previously reserved only for the very wealthy. And I just think that's a transformation that we won't fully see the impact of in the near term, because it'll take a while. But it's just very cool to see 15-year-olds asking advanced Python programming questions to this robot and getting very good answers back.
Excellent. That sounds like, and see if you get it sounds like a William Gibson Neuromancer sort of cyberpunk sort of thing brought to life, where like I need to be an expert in art history, plug something in.
Yeah, basically, or at least I need access to that for sure.
Yeah.
I just think that can, like, for all this shit that ChatGPT is going to get over the next while, because all new technology is hated initially, this is like, we shouldn't lose sight of these developments. They're going to be really important for humanity.
Awesome. Des, thank you so much. I mean, it's been great. I kind of like, and for kind of sharing your time and your expertise and all that sort of stuff kind of with this end. And I've learned kind of like a lot as well. So just want to say thank you for all of that. That's been awesome.
Thank you very much, Adrian. It's been a pleasure.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. And do tune in again. Thanks very much.